Hello, all. I'm going to go ahead and start the second live session for class EXW 100. And I apologize for the late start. I actually recorded the whole entire thing under the wrong link, so that's great. But anyway, so we'll just go ahead and get started now, and people can at least watch the recorded version. So the first thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about was research and evaluating sources. So one of the best skills that you can develop is being able to find and evaluate credible sources to do your own research. So the additional resources tab in the course, which is, it's listed across the top, there's just a little tab for it, has many websites for government, academic, and professional websites or organizations. So things like the American Health Association, the World Health Organization, and Harvard Public Health. So websites like these will typically have position papers, fact sheets, or simple synopses of research on a topic. So these sites are great for fairly basic and easy to understand information, and sometimes have a little bit more in-depth information, but they're really good as a place to start. And they'll give you a good foundation so that you can understand more of the literature once you get into it. So then typically what I do when you guys ask me questions in the class is I start off with Google Scholar. So if you just type into your search engine, Google Scholar, it'll pull up this separate search engine, which just pulls up articles that are from academic sites. So it often just has the abstracts or the summary, the first part of the paper, for free, and you have to pay for the whole article, but you can find a lot of information from the abstract, things like the population, the sample size, basic study design, and the most relevant results. It also helps you get an idea of what type of information is out there if your topic's really broad, so that you can kind of narrow it down and see what most of the research is on. So from there, if you have access to academic or professional search engines through work or school, those can be really useful. So usually what I do is start with Google Scholar, and then I'll go to PubMed, because that's a health-oriented site. And so these are easier to search in, and they have full articles, for free from the journals, because, whatever organization or school, whatever that you're with, has purchased those articles and sites and journals. So when I'm searching for topics or information on your questions, typically look at Google Scholar first to get a basic idea of what's out there and how to narrow the topic. And then I'll go into PubMed. And usually when I search in PubMed, what I'll do is add onto the end of add into my search terms either review or meta-analyses. So systematic reviews or meta-analyses are papers that synthesize information from many studies to provide a snapshot of the current state of research on the topic. So this is a really good way to get an idea of where the current state of literature is right now, and what's like the general opinion on a topic at the moment. So Cochrane reviews are a specific type of systematic review of primary research, specifically on health and health-related policy. And these are internationally recognized as the highest standard in evidence-based healthcare resources. So if you're looking for a health-related topic and you see a Cochrane review, then look no further. You'll find exactly what you need in that article. It'll tell you, it'll give you a really good idea of the research that's out there, and basically, what we know right now on that topic. And if you're just thinking about like a 100 level class, you can stop there. But if you want, you can also look a little further, and you can start off by using the references at the end of one of these systematic reviews as your starting point, and look up those individual articles and read the full article to do a little bit of a deeper dive into what specifically the literature is saying. At this point, how you evaluate literature gets a little bit more complicated, so I'm not going to go there. But if you haven't already, you'll get really familiar with how to evaluate resources once you start writing papers. Because you typically can't use a review in a paper, you have to use the actual article. But if it's just for gaining personal knowledge, then systematic reviews and meta-analyses are perfect. They're really good places to look. So now I'd like to move on to the questions that you guys have asked. So the first one is there a relationship between lipids, so fats, and sleep? For this question, I followed exactly the process that I explained earlier. So I did a Google Scholar search and then PubMed search for more specific information. So from doing the Google Scholar search, what I saw was that there were a lot of articles linking dyslipidemia. So dyslipidemia is elevated blood cholesterol or triglycerides or both, or a low HDL cholesterol level. So this is if your lipids are just out of whack, they're not what they should be. And sleep. And then I also found a bunch of information on sleep and weight status. So those were the two things that I looked into further on PubMed. So with looking at dyslipidemia and sleep, I found several articles and a systematic review. So in the review, the authors found that there was no clear link between sleep and dyslipidemia. So many of the studies that they found were small in size and used different measures for sleep quality or duration. So a link hasn't been found yet, but they may eventually find one with more research. And this is a really good example of why systematic reviews can be so helpful. So they do a lot of the work that you would need to do in judging the quality of articles and exactly how to compare them and see what the depth of the research is. You know, one article doesn't define a topic, right? So if one article finds something that you're looking for. So if one article found a link between dyslipidemia and sleep, but these 5 other articles didn't, sometimes it can be hard to judge. Well, why is that? Is there a link only in certain populations or only when you use this one type of measure of sleep quality or whatever? And so systematic reviews can help you sort through that and save you that work. So the other topic was on sleep and weight status. So there is a definitive link between sleep deprivation and overweight or obesity in children and adults, and actually even in infants. So if an infant is sleep deprived, it actually increases their risk of being overweight or obese when they're older, which I thought was pretty interesting. And in a review article on sleep and weight in adults, authors listed several factors that linked both poor sleep and weight gain, a lot of which seemed kind of like common sense. So these included increased food intake and decreased energy expenditure from being awake longer but feeling sluggish, and then biological responses such as changes in levels of appetite regulating hormones such as leptin and ghrelin. So they mentioned screen time as an emerging major contributor to sleep deprivation, partially because it may encourage sedentary behavior, and it's also linked to increased caloric intake, which I thought was kind of interesting. But it makes sense, right? Like if you're mindlessly eating in front of the TV or looking at your phone or whatever. So other factors like shift work, long working hours, and increased time commuting to and from work have strong links to shorter sleep times, but have not yet been proven to be linked to weight status. But they're working on it. So that's what I found about lipids and sleep. So the next question was on food intolerance testing and the importance or not of replacing foods you eliminate. So first, just to clarify, so an allergy is an actual immune response that can be severe or life-threatening. So in contrast, food intolerance symptoms are generally less serious and they're limited to digestive problems. So things like feeling bloated or having diarrhea or being gassy or whatever. So things like that. So they're a little bit less serious. So this would be the difference between having celiac disease and getting stomach aches when you eat bread, or having a milk protein allergy versus getting bloated when you drink milk. So for allergies, for the most part, you need to completely remove any trace of that food from your diet. So if you think about things like peanut allergies, right? Like some people with peanut allergies can't even smell peanuts or they get a response from it. And so, these are really important to completely eliminate from your diet. But having intolerances, it's a little bit looser. So you may still be able to eat a small amount of that food, or you may be okay with certain versions of a food item, but not with others. So dairy is a great example. So some people that are lactose intolerant can eat cheese and yogurt with no problem, but they just can't drink fluid milk. So the lactose or milk sugar that's in cheese and yogurt is partially broken down and easier to digest. And the harder a cheese is, the more that it's been aged, the more broken down the sugars are, and generally speaking, the easier it is to digest. And then thinking of milk proteins, some people can't consume cow's milk. It upsets their stomach, but they can drink goat's milk because the proteins are smaller and a little bit easier to digest. So that's just a little background on allergies versus intolerances. But to get back to the question, so from what I could find, skin and blood tests for food allergies are, only so accurate. There's a large number of false positives and negatives that occur with those tests. So even if a doctor does recommend that you take one of these tests, they may also suggest that you do an elimination diet as well. And elimination diets can also be used for food intolerances. That's typically how you test for food intolerance. So generally speaking, most of the information that's out there, the journal type articles, most of them are on elimination diets geared towards allergies. And they talk about eosinophilic esophagitis, so allergy-induced inflammation of the esophagus. So this is usually like if people are experiencing that, then they have them follow this elimination diet. And that specific diet tends to focus on milk, soy, wheat, peanuts, tree nuts, and seafood. So these are the 6 most common allergens. To test for intolerances, you're going to follow the same basic format for the eosinophilic esophagitis elimination diet, but you might want to consider excluding even a broader range of foods, just because there are a lot of foods that may upset people's stomachs, but again, it won't be an allergy, it's an intolerance. So things like legumes, nightshade vegetables, so that's like tomatoes, eggplant, white potatoes, peppers, not black pepper, monosodium glutamate, so MSG, and high FODMAP foods. So FODMAP foods are highly fermentable, short-chain carbohydrates that give some people digestive problems. So it's an acronym, and it stands for fermentable oligo, di, monosaccharides, and polyols. So examples of FODMAPs would be lactose, fructose, sorbitol, mannitol, fructo-oligosaccharides, galacto-oligosaccharides, and these are in some very healthy foods. So, you all are familiar with lactose, but, fructose is in a lot of fruit. And things like garlic, beets, beans have high levels of a lot of these different FODMAPs. So it's pretty easy if you Google FODMAPs to find lists online. And then it'll list the foods that are high in each individual type as well. So like it'll have a whole list of foods that are really high in oligosaccharides and a list of foods that are really high in disaccharides. And there is a good amount of overlap, but that just gives you an idea of how they're broken down. So that's a pretty easy one to Google. So how you go about doing the elimination diet is first there's an elimination phase. So this can last between 2 and 8 weeks, depending on how bad your symptoms are. Generally speaking, if you're just testing for food intolerances, you can do 2 weeks. That's fine. So you don't want to eat any of the foods that you're testing for. So either any of those top 6 allergy-inducing foods or any of those other foods as well. So you really want to watch your labels and make sure that you're not getting any small amounts of things hidden in other food products. The gluten in particular is found in a lot of different items that you wouldn't think, like soup bases and stuff like that. So you have to really be careful, because what you want to do is have a clean slate when you're testing things. So you don't want to have a lot of things passing through and kind of like messing up your results. So after you do that elimination phase, you do the reintroduction phase. So foods are put back into the diet one at a time with a washout period of a couple of days in between. And it may be a good idea to keep a food diary to monitor how you feel. But, if you have a response, a lot of people are like, you don't need a diary because you know exactly what it feels like if you're having a response to it. But, it couldn't hurt. So this whole process can take up to 6 weeks at a minimum. So it's a big commitment, but it can be very helpful to finding foods that trigger a response. And just one more comment about reintroduction. It's funny because I work with WIC, so the Women, Infants, and Children's Program, and how you go about that reintroduction phase is actually how we recommend introducing foods to infants for that exact same reason, to test and see if they have any bad reactions to foods. And so if you think about it, they don't need an elimination phase because they're already a clean slate. And then you introduce foods, you offer it to them a couple of times, a couple of days in a row, just to see if they have any reactions before you add another food to their diet. So I thought that was interesting. So for replacements for foods, I just refer to other foods within that food group. So, there are typically many sources of a specific nutrient that are out there. So, if you have to eliminate a couple of foods from your diet, it shouldn't really affect you. So the student who asked this question brought up eggs in particular. But if you think about it, the things that people eat eggs for, so the high protein content, maybe the fat soluble vitamins, you can find that in a lot of other sources. There's many sources of other sources of protein, meat, poultry, beans, soy, things, you can find fat soluble vitamins in most of those other sources as well. So, if you have to eliminate a lot of foods, it may take a little bit of time and planning to try to get everything that you need. But it's definitely not impossible. You can definitely have a full, well-rounded diet, even with having to eliminate a few foods. So the next question was, what kind of vitamins or brands would I recommend? So I wouldn't recommend taking any single ingredient vitamins unless you've talked to your doctor and there's a reason why they want you to. Some nutrients interact with each other and can result in limited absorption or other types of issues. So for example, calcium inhibits iron absorption, and you have that same relationship with zinc and copper. So you want to take a little bit more care, because they're competing for the same, I'm totally blanking on the word, but it for like the little things that help you that absorb in your stomach. So you just want to be really careful with having just single nutrient vitamins. You want to be really careful with supplements. So herbal supplements, things like teas, tinctures, and pills, things like CoQ10, Dong Quai, and St. John's wort may also have unintended side effects. There are many concerning drug-herb interactions. So St. John's wort can increase the effect of drugs that have sedative effects. Black cohosh may enhance the liver toxicity of certain medications. So many people think that vitamins and supplements are natural, and so that they're safe and harmless, and they won't even mention them to their doctors. But they can be serious if you take them together with other nutrients or with specific other medications. You can have a lot of negative side effects. So it's really important to ask your doctor before you take them, and definitely mention them if you're already taking them. So the only vitamins or supplements that I would advocate for without talking to your doctor first would be a multivitamin. So for women, I'd look for one that includes iron. For men, that's a little bit less important, but a lot of women tend to be a little bit on the anemic side, so it couldn't hurt. But regardless of what you're buying, whether it's vitamins, supplements, whatever, you want to look out for what's called a USP label, which is the most common in the US. They also have NSF International or consumerlab.com labels. So vitamins and supplements are not regulated by the Federal Drug Association. I'm not exactly sure how it works in other countries, but yeah, so there's really no government oversight to what's in those pills that they're selling you. So those organizations that I listed, USP, NSF International, and Consumer Lab, are third-party organizations that certify that what is in that product is what is on the label. They also confirm that it's not contaminated with anything. They do not guarantee the safety or effectiveness of those supplements. So you know, they can tell you that what's on the label is in there, but just because that is what it claims to be doesn't mean that the claims on the label, or, you know, say you came across some article online that said that, you know, St. John's wort's really good for depression or whatever. It doesn't mean that that's actually going to work. The only supplements that has a lot of research on it and has been proven effective is fish oil for lowering cholesterol. So, so just be wary with supplements and with vitamins. Be careful. Always come to your doctor. So a couple common brands that are USP certified are Nature Made and Kirkland Best. So those are generally brands that at least have been certified. So the next couple topics are clarifications of class material. So someone asked for clarification on growth charts for kids. So the student writes, if overweight is defined as being at above the 85th percentile for gender and age, and obesity is defined as being at or above the 95th percentile for gender and age, that means that 15% of children will be overweight or obese and 5% of children will be obese. And if that's the case, using BMI percentiles as the defining measure would not be useful for tracking trends in populations over time. So growth charts are a bit tricky to discuss, and what that student wrote is generally correct and how we explain growth charts to parents. However, we know it can't be as simple as it sounds, because some children plot above the 100 percentile on charts, and because you do hear those, you know, those claims like, you know, the rates of obesity in children have increased 15% since 1992 or whatever. So for a little explanation, the charts are based on growth patterns of a sample of individuals that creates a standard to judge the growth of other children. So there are two ways to choose your sample to create that curve. So either you're going to look at ideal growth or actual or typical growth. So the World Health Organization charts look at infant and child growth under optimal conditions and choose their samples from cities around the globe. So for example, the World Health Organization charts for infants are based on breastfed infants as the norm in establishing the growth curve. So at WIC and in general, we use the WHO charts for infants, and we use CDC charts for children that are over 2. So CDC charts are based on a representative sample of Americans, so how children are actually growing. So their reference standards were updated in 2000, but include data from many government documents, health surveys, and studies conducted between 1963 and 1994. So the previous standards were set in 1977 and include data going back to the 20s, and were based mostly on formula-fed babies, at least that growth curve for kids that are 0 to 1 year old. Because the standards cover large periods of time and are not updated regularly, you can see trends in BMI. So that's why you'll hear things like obesity rates have increased a certain percentage in this group of people. Because, you know, if you're taking you're taking an average of this huge chunk of people from the past, and you're comparing the way that people are growing now to them. So you can see some trends. So the next person asked for clarification on social marketing and commercial marketing and what their similarities and differences are. So commercial marketing campaigns are basically anything you've seen on TV commercials, billboards, internet pop-up ads that are encouraging you to buy a specific product. So they appeal to their target audiences with specific types of messaging and images. So if you think of that show Mad Men and how they came about, you know, creating those messages and thinking through how they were going to target their audiences, you know, that's what commercial marketing is basically trying to get into the psychology of your target audience and encouraging them to buy something. So some common examples are Nike with their Just Do It campaign, Coke with their Share a Coke campaign, McDonald's with I'm Lovin' It. You can use traditional marketing campaigns for healthy foods too. If you think of the California Milk Processors Boards with the Got Milk campaign, you know, a campaign when everybody has the milk mustache, you know, and that's for healthier food. There are also several campaigns through the Wonderful Corporation that promote things like the Get Cracking campaign for pistachios, or Good Choice Kid campaign for Halo oranges, little baby oranges. But regardless, all of these marketing campaigns are geared towards getting you to buy something. So social marketing campaigns, on the other hand, are trying to sell you a healthy behavior. So they are a little less visible in the environment, but some of them have been pretty successful. So if you think of the Just No campaign, which is that anti-drug campaign from the 80s, that was trying to encourage young people to not do drugs. So, it's a lot harder, these campaigns are, than just trying to get somebody to buy something, because it doesn't take a lot of energy and time or whatever just to buy something. But it does take a lot to motivate someone to make a positive health change. So these campaigns are a little bit more challenging, but they can be useful, and they can be positive and have good results. So other than the Just No campaign, there's also the campaign for tobacco-free kids. I come from a nutrition world, so I always think of things like Rethink Your Drink, which promotes non-sugar sweetened beverages. So namely things like water versus Gatorade or pop or whatever. Or Champions for Change, which promotes fruit and vegetable consumption, physical activity, and food security. So again, these campaigns are a little bit hard to judge a little bit more hard to judge the success of, and are really encouraging people to make these very positive changes, things that we've talked about in this class, versus trying to sell you something. So that's the main difference. So that's all I have prepared. I'll do a check for questions, but I know because I had a little trouble logging on, I'm pretty sure there probably aren't. All right. Yep, so I don't see any. So just remember to turn in all of your week 5 assignments on Monday at 6:59 UTC. And that's it. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.